Yo, what's up guys, it's Talon. Today we're going to be giving you guys a meta report, basically explaining to you the best champions in every role for the new season and how to climb. I'm not going to do a tier list necessarily. Again, this is more of a video where I just describe how the meta is, best types of champions, the best specific champions at the top. And then if you guys are curious about how your specific champions or mains fit into the meta, feel free to ask in the comments and I can explain more in depth. But to me, a full-on tier list usually is just a waste of time because I don't really think champs fit into tiers necessarily, because depending on the context of the game, various champions can be really useful. So we're just going to get right into it, starting off with top lane. For me, bruisers right now are just the overall archetype of champions that fit the best in the meta, especially champs like Renekton, Darius, Riven, and Mordekaiser. To me, those just feel like kind of the top 4 champions overall right now in top lane. They all have quite good early games. Darius and Mordekaiser are a little less early game, but still quite strong. Mordekaiser overall insane scaling, and the other 3 again really good early game bruisers who just can really carry games very well. They have good team fighting and yet can still side lane, split push, and are just generally very versatile. Now, the one champion that I would maybe put alongside that we don't have a ton of experience with yet is Heimerdinger. He is really good in top, mid, and support. And so is he at the very top of top lane is a little hard to tell, but he's definitely a very strong laner. You know, ranged top laners can be very hard to lane against. And as a whole, he's a champion who does seem very powerful. So I do think that's, you know, something that we'll monitor more as he comes out, or as he's played more rather. But currently I do think that Heimerdinger is quite high as well. Some tanks are decent. I would say especially to me, Ornn and Gragas are like the 2 best tanks. Most of the other tanks, they're not greatest. They can still provide value in games. They can be good team fighters, and so if you like that play style, then it still can be useful. But to me, a lot of bruisers, again, champs like Darius, even Mordekaiser, Aatrox is actually one that I forgot to mention in the bruisers, who also I would say is at the very top alongside those other 4. These champs are really good into tanks, and so it's kind of hard to play tanks necessarily, but you can always still find value in team fights, which is why tanks still will always be kind of useful. Then you have like Yasuo and Yone. To me, these are decent champions. I don't think that they're overly broken right now in top lane specifically. I think Yasuo doesn't do the best into the best top laners, but because he's so strong, he still can find value out of lane and is still a decent laner. And Yone will scale really well and can melt through tanks. So anytime that the enemy are very tanky, Yone is going to find a lot of value as well. For me, most split pushers aren't great because of hex gates and because of the fact that a lot of bruisers can still match their split push and then be more useful in team fights. But Jax specifically, I think Jax is actually quite good right now. And so if you're looking for a split pusher, I would say Jax is definitely the best one in the meta. So overall, the top 5 bruisers in the game right now, Renekton, Darius, Riven, Mordekaiser, and Aatrox, they really, to me, run the top lane meta. Heimerdinger sort of fits into that just because he is really broken right now as a whole, just as a champion. And then tanks will be decent in the meta still, while split pushers, they're not quite as strong. But top lane does revolve around counter picks, and so say that you see a good matchup for whatever champion that you main, locking them in because you see a good matchup is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and top lane is definitely very matchup based overall. And then after that we have jungle, and for jungle, Vi is just by far the best champion in the meta. I don't think it's really that close. The reason for this is because not only is Vi having an insane clear speed, tanky, lots of damage, good CC, good scaling, good early game, literally good at every point in the game, but she also counters all of the other best champions in the game. What are these other champions? Riven, Lee, and Rengar, probably the next 3 best overall junglers right now. And Vi loves playing in all of these champions because they're not tanky enough to necessarily 1v1 her unless they're very ahead. She can out clear most of them in terms of clear speed, and she still can be a lot more useful even from behind. So after that, the next couple champions that we have, I guess, you know, after Riven, Lee, and Rengar would be Talon, and I would say kind of Xin Zhao, to me, are some of the other kind of best junglers right now. Talon is just the best kind of snowballing lethality assassin jungler, so when the enemy are quite squishy, he's a great champion to pick into that. Xin Zhao is also really good into a lot of ranged champions, so these types of champs are going to be good in these scenarios. If you're looking for an AP jungler, I would say that Lilia is overall the best one right now, but Diana is decent too. Evelynn is always pretty good for solo queue just as a champion. Then there's some tank junglers that also are decent right now. Mostly Amumu and Maokai, I would say, are kind of the best tank junglers. So if you're looking for one of those, they do really well into Vi specifically, because Vi is not as good at dealing into tanks because she's a single target champ who's kind of or trying to blow up squishy champions or like assassins, really shut down assassins, make it hard for these like hyper carry champions to play. So tank junglers are a little bit harder for her to play into, generally speaking, though she still does pretty well into those because she's kind of just broken and does well into everything. So overall, to sum up the meta for jungle, Vi is by far the best champion in the jungle. Then you have Riven, Lee, and Rengar being kind of like really OP in almost every game. After that, it's going to be very matchup based. So these assassins like Talon and Xin Zhao, they're going to be really good in the squishier champs and the range comps. Your Lilia or other AP champs are going to be good at bursting down tankier comps, especially when you have a lot of ADCs on your team. A lot of bruisers are just generally going to be pretty strong in the meta. And then a couple tanks like a Mumu and Maokai will especially work into Vi. So that's about it for the jungle meta. Now let's get into mid. Okay, so for mid lane, there are two mage champions that are by far more broken than every other champion, apart from one. And those two champions are Syndra and Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger is just crazy strong right now, has really good damage, and mid lane is just kind of the role he fits best into overall. And then Syndra is just so insanely broken right now. I mean, her scaling is insane. She's still a pretty safe laner. She scales so well. Like, the buff to her was just really, really good for her. Definitely a very, very strong champion. But if you're looking for a champion to play really well into those champs, then Kassadin is going to be great for you, which is why I would almost consider Kassadin to be the best champion because of how good Kassadin is into the other best champions. Kassadin's obviously really good counter into any AP champs. That's just how the champion works with its design, especially into these types of champs like Syndra and those other types of kind of scaling mages. After that, there's some other really good scaling mages like Zoe, Morgana, Ziggs, Vladimir. All of these champs are very consistent, very good champs to main. They're just kind of a little bit worse than Syndra and Heimerdinger, I would say, but they still scale really well and are generally going to be good in most scenarios. Then for like an assassin, I think Akali is definitely by far the best assassin in the mid lane right now. She's just very good into most matchups, still very consistent, and has quite a high skill ceiling if you're really good at her. And then you have your AD champions, which obviously you're going to be playing these ones a lot, either when you really want to bully an early game, or if you have an AP jungler. Jace is going to be the best lane bully overall. Akshan and Lucian are decent too, but Jace is going to be better than them as a lane bully. And then Yasuo and Yone. Yasuo especially is quite strong and can deal really well with a lot of these mages because of his wind wall and his dashing and his mobility. So I would say Yasuo kind of fits into a little bit higher of the meta compared to the rest of these AD champs. And then those other ones like Yone, Jace, Lucian, Akshan are all going to be strong when they have good matchups. So overall, it's generally a lot more AP focused because the jungle is pretty AD focused. And so obviously having that mix of damage between mid and jungle is usually good. And again, Syndra, Heimerdinger, and Kassadin are really running the meta right now in mid lane. All right, and then for ADC, we have Varus just being by far the best. Like, he is so freaking strong right now. He can build so many ways. He's good in pretty much every champ. He works pretty well with every support. Very, very OP. Definitely the best ADC in the game right now. Then for me, it's kind of the next tier of champs. Ezreal to me, very, very strong as well. He's pretty strong in lane and still scales really well. And then Xayah is also kind of the same thing, where good laner, but still good out of lane as well. Her late game got buffed and her early game got nerfed a bit, but that generally doesn't change too much to me. Xayah is still very strong, very consistent champion. And then Kai'Sa, I mean, Kai'Sa is just always broken. I mean, the invisibility on her third ability is insane. She has crazy damage, build diversity, good into every matchup, all these types of things. So basically those first four champions, Varus, Ezreal, Xayah, and Kai'Sa, can be played in every situation, which is what makes them so dang good right now. After that, you have your hyper carries like Zeri and Tristana. They're going to be really good whenever you have a Lulu, a Yuumi, these other enchanters that really make hyper carries really strong, but they're not going to work as well in those other scenarios compared to the previous ADCs that we mentioned. And then you have your early game aggressive ADCs. Caitlyn's going to be the best of those. Really good poke, really good early game, and still scales decently. But then Miss Fortune and Lucian and Draven as well. They're also still going to work with those really aggressive supports as well and be good in those types of situations. Most other of the ADCs that I didn't really mention are just going to be situational. If you see a good matchup for them, or they're, have certain pairings that they work really well with, then they're going to be strong. But generally speaking, they're a lot less consistent than the ones at the top of the meta. And finally, we have support. So the best supports overall are going to be Lulu. This is just the most strong support. I mean, Lulu, so good with any hyper carry champion, and a lot of hyper carries are pretty strong in the ADC roles we spoke about, like the Kai'Sa and Xayah, Zeri, Tristana. And Lulu just makes all these champs pretty much unkillable and makes them do an insane amount of damage. He's a little harder to play sometimes in solo queue, which is why you might want to shift to one of the other champs such as Thresh, who is pretty much the best tank support right now. Nautilus falling short behind them as well as a really good support that can carry and make a lot more engages. For other enchanters that are really strong, Soraka and Melio definitely fit in. I mean, Melio's able to buff range and work really well, especially with high range and hyper carry ADCs. And then Soraka is just really good at peeling, so anytime that you need someone who's going to make sure to heal up enemy poke or to protect your teammates, she's going to be great in that situation. Leona and Maokai are a couple other tanks that work pretty well overall, but not quite as strong as Thresh or Nautilus. And then Heimerdinger is going to be kind of the best like damaging poke support. He is definitely just really strong in general, which means that he can play support as well. I don't know if I necessarily consider him the strongest support, but if you're looking to really be able to carry on a ranged champion, then I would say Heimer is going to be good. To me, Nami is also pretty good at carrying as a enchanter, so if you want to be able to carry, but you also want to play enchanters, I would say Nami is going to be quite good for that. So overall, Lulu being the best enchanter, Thresh being the best tank, and a lot of the other ones we mentioned being quite strong. The ones I didn't mention are probably still fine in a lot of scenarios, just not on the same level as these other ones as a whole. So that's going to do it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that you can understand the meta a bit better now, so you can hopefully choose champions that will allow you to climb in the newest season. If you're interested in asking about other champions, or you just want to know, just ask about how your champion or any other champions fit into the meta, and I'll definitely be able to answer those questions if you're curious. Remember, it's a lot more important to play champions that you're actually good at than it is to play champions that fit perfectly into the meta. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.